Well, hello, friends, and welcome back to Sacrifice and Salvation here at Chapel by the Sea Presbyterian Church on Fort Myers Beach, Florida. I'm Dr. Jim Berger, the interim pastor. Welcome. Those of you who are here in person, those of you online, we share together in studying God's Word about the events of Holy Week. Now we're up to the climax, and that's the crucifixion of Jesus. The context is that he's been arrested on Thursday night. The chief priests and the scribes have brought him before Pilate, and he's been sent to Herod. He's been sent back. Pilate's afraid there's going to be a riot, so he has decreed that Jesus shall be crucified. We're told he was turned over to the cohort of the Roman legions, the Roman soldiers, and for a flogging before they take him out to be crucified. So he's first taken, strapped to a post, and then they bring out the flog to beat the guy. Now, the official guidelines for flogging under Roman military law was that you were to beat the person until the flesh on their back hung in strips. And this is what they would use. This is scourge, or the flagrum. And as you can see, the handle but straps, but it has lead weights at the end, lead spikes, sheep bone shards, lead balls. It's an awful piece of abusive material. And they strip off his clothes and just tie him to this post and just beat him. And when they're satisfied, it's done, put the clothes back on him, take him back to Pilate, who presents him to the people. Hey, I forgot to turn my light on. Gee whiz. There. And take him back to Pilate, who says, okay, take him out to be crucified. He's afraid he's going to have a riot. He thinks they're doing this out of jealousy, but he's afraid of what could happen if this gets out of hand. And Jerusalem is a powder keg of civil unrest, and the whole country is. William Barclay tells us in the 40 years before Jesus was born, in the stretch of in the land of Judea, I think he said that 70,000 people died from abortive rebellions during that period. It was just horrible that people rise up, follow these leaders, say, God has called me to deliver you, and the Romans would come in and just obliterate them. And this was in an area that would stretch from here to Sarasota. Imagine losing 70,000 people in that stretch. So he's got a legitimate concern about this getting out of hand. So he turns him over to the legions, and they take him out to be crucified. Standard procedure is that the condemned carries his crossbar out to the cross, out to the crucifixion site. So they strap it onto his arms and tell him start walking. Now he's already been flogged, so he is in really bad shape when he starts out. And we're told there are two other criminals being led out with him. And so they start this procession through the city streets to the place outside the city wall where the crucifixion will take place. And as Jesus goes along, we're told that some of the people who followed him were lining the streets. Remember, it was a minority who got him condemned. It wasn't the majority of the people. And so as they're passing through the streets, some of the women are crying for him, and he tells them, don't cry for me, cry for yourselves in this city. We're told that Mary, his mother, Mary Magdalene, and Mary, the wife of Cleopas, followed along and went out to the hill with him, along with the disciple John. But as he's going along on what we know as the Via Dolorosa, he stumbles and falls, and he's just so beaten down, he can't get up. And this is a heavy beam of wood that he's carrying. And so when the guards see that, they're not going to be able to move him, they grab a bystander, Simon of Cyrene, and they press him into duty. And so he is made to pick up Jesus' cross and carry it to the hill. Now, as they reach Golgotha, the place of the skull, they begin the process of the crucifixion. They had this down to a science. They do this every day. And the crossbar is mortised, so it just drops onto the upright. They have rings on it, metal rings, so they can lift it up, drop it into the hole after they've mounted the guy. And the way they attach them, we always see the same one, but evidence has shown us there were several different methods by which they executed their criminals. Some were tied over at the top, others were nailed. Generally, it was through the wrist, not through the hand. It was between the radius and ulna. I mean, when they did that, they pierced the nerves going into the hand. They would nail sometimes through the front of the feet, piercing the nerves in the feet. Other times they would nail through the ankles. And we have evidence of that. They've recovered mummies or skeletons from crucifixions, and they can see there's actually nails through the wrists, nails through the ankles or the feet. And then they would place a small seat under the buttocks on the cross. And that's so that it would take longer to die. Because what happens in crucifixion is you suffocate. And it could come in a matter of hours. There was records that sometimes it took 3 days of suffering. But what's happening is when you're stretched out, the weight of your body pulls forward. And it doesn't take long, and your arms dislocate. They can't hold you. And you're nailed in the wrists, nailed in the feet. And in order to, now you pitch forward, and now your chest is stretched, so you can't get a breath. So in order to breathe, you have to pull against the nails in your hands and push against the nails in your feet, catch your breath, and then you back down, you sag against the weight of the nails again. And remember, they've nailed through the nerves. It is awful. It's been described as the most horrible form of execution ever devised. And and as Jesus hangs there, we have the 7 last words that he says, but one of them he says is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now he's quoting Psalm 22. That's the opening line of Psalm 22. And by citing that, he's calling to mind the content of the Psalm. One of the passages says, I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax within me, melted in my breast. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws, and you lay me in the dust of death. And it goes on to say, my hands and feet are shriveled. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me, and they divide my clothes among themselves and cast lots for my clothing. And that's just what happens. The soldiers take what little clothing these prisoners have, they divide it up among themselves, they sell it at the market or something. And it said Jesus's cloak was woven in one piece. So instead of cutting it, they cast lots for it, which is just what was predicted in the Psalm. This Psalm was written 1,000 years before the crucifixion. And yet it's so apt. And that's probably why it came to Jesus's mind as he hung there. Also, remember I said there was 8 currencies in circulation in Jerusalem at the time. This place is so cosmopolitan that they write the charge against him in 3 languages. It's written in Aramaic, because Hebrew is not the common language anymore. Aramaic is. It's a variation on it. It's written in Latin, and it's written in Greek. And one of the characteristics of Greek is there's no punctuation in the Greek, and it's all written in uppercase. Latin does have punctuation. Another thing that the Psalm says is, all who see me mock at me. They make mouths at me. They shake their heads. Commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights. We're told that the priest stood at the foot of the cross and mocked him and said, he said he could call down angels to save him. Let him do so now, and we will believe in him. So they mock him just like the Psalm said. I mean, it's eerie in its accuracy. So as he's dying, as he's hanging there, one of the criminals, their thieves, are one on his left, one on his right. He crucified between 2 thieves, and the one who mocks him and says, "Come on, if you're really the Messiah, save yourselves and self and us." But the one on the other side rebukes him and says, "No, this man has done nothing. We deserve what we've gotten. This man is innocent." And he says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus tells him, truly, I tell you, this day you will be with me in paradise. Meanwhile, Mary and Salome, depending on which version we're looking at, are watching. And he sees his mother and he sees the disciple whom he loves, John. And he says to her, mother, behold your son, son, behold your mother. Well, that's his taking care of he's supposed to be taking care of his mother because he's the eldest son. That's his responsibility. So he passes that to John, and John and Mary remain close for the rest of her life. And John will end up out at Ephesus as the Bishop of Ephesus in Western Turkey today, as the years go by. He says, I thirst, and they bring him some wine mixed with myrrh, I think it's wine mixed with a drug, and he refuses it. And he's saying, finally, he says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. And then the last thing he says is, it is finished. And with that, he surrenders his spirit to God, or as the King James Version used to say, he gave up the ghost. Or the modern version says he breathed his last. And this is around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He's been on the cross since 12, and it's surprising to the leaders that he's died so quickly. But he was pretty well worked over beforehand. So now that he has died, there's all these strange things that happen. The sky is darkened, there's an earthquake, and we're told that the veil in the temple was rent in two in this earthquake. And this was a really thick, heavy veil. It was said that a team of oxen pulling from either side could not pull it apart. And yet in this, the climactic events after his death, the veil is torn down the middle. And one of the centurions standing there looks up and says, truly, this man was a son of God. And we don't know for sure what that means for him, but he was very moved by it. So we have the 3 crosses left on the hill. Now now they have another problem. This is Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock. The Sabbath begins at sundown, which will be about 6. So they cannot have these prisoners on the cross at sundown. They have to get them off the cross and buried before the Sabbath begins. So since your whole premise is, they got to keep pushing themselves up to breathe, the Romans have an easy solution. They take a hammer and they go around and break the guy's legs hanging there so they can't push up, then they'll suffocate more quickly. You talk about gruesome. And so that's what happens to the 2 thieves. But when they come to Jesus, they're surprised to see that he's already dead. But he has expired, and he very clearly surrenders his life. He doesn't just die; he gives it up, for he has that power. And when they see that he is already dead, they want to make sure. So one of the soldiers thrusts a spear into his side, and blood mixed with water came out, which tells you that they pierced the sack around his heart when they did that. All right, so now we're getting towards sunset. And Joseph of Arimathea, who's a member of the Sanhedrin, goes to Pilate and asks to take custody of the body and to bury it. And Pilate's surprised that he's already dead. And so he calls for the centurion, who comes in, and he certifies, yes, this man is already dead. So he says, all right, to Joseph, you may have it. So he and Nicodemus, we met in the beginning of John's gospel, when he came to Jesus by night, Nicodemus and Joseph go buy spices and linen wrappings, and they wrap his body and put the spices on for burial. Their servants assist them, and they take him to a new tomb that has never been used before, what we know as the garden tomb. And they place him inside and have assistants. They roll this huge stone in front of it. Now the stone, when it goes into place, it's pushed up a little slight incline, And then when they close, they just use gravity to roll it down this little incline. And at the bottom, there's a little dip that it slots into. That's what keeps it in place. Now, the priests go back to Pilate saying they want a guard on the tomb because this man said he was going to rise again. So we want to make sure his disciples don't come and open up that grave and take him away and say, look, he's risen from the dead. So Pilate says to him, you have the guard, make it secure. And so they go to the tomb, and the last thing they do is they place a seal on it, a wax seal, saying that the governor has said, do not touch, stay away from this. And they think that's the end. Now, the one thing is, everybody believes the same thing at this point, which is Jesus is dead. Nobody's anticipating a resurrection. They all think this is the end. And you can imagine the despair, because this is less than 30 hours after the Last Supper. It happened that fast. So now they're decimated, just in despair. They're in hiding because they're afraid now that they've gone after Jesus. Maybe they'll come after us, his followers. So the disciples are in hiding, or they're in the upper room. They're staying out of sight because they don't want to draw attention to themselves. And they're not waiting. They're in despair. So that's where we leave it on Friday night as the Sabbath begins. Now, the question will come up. He's on the third day he rose again. Well, if he was buried on Friday night and he rose on Sunday morning, how can that be 3 days? Well, any part of a day is considered a day. So he was in the tomb on Friday before sundown. That's day 1. Saturday is day 2. Sunday morning is day 3. On the third day, he will rise. When I was in the Bahamas, you had to be there for 3 days before you get your marriage license. And so if you're getting married on Saturday and you flew in on Wednesday night, that's day 1. Thursday is day 2. Friday morning is day 3. You can get your license. And it's the same principle that's applied here on the third day. They speak of any part of the day as the whole day. And so that's where we find them. That's where we leave them. And end of story? Well, we'll find out. Next time we'll look at the resurrection. And the really shocking thing, and the incredible astonishment of the people who are involved in this. Because what are they expecting? They're expecting a dead body. They're expecting that Jesus is dead. That is what they believe. He has died. And that's it. That's the end of it. So we'll see if indeed it is when we pick up the story with the resurrection next week on sacrifice and salvation, the events of Holy Week, as we continue on here at Chapel by the Sea as God's people and exploring what God's word says to us about these events. Okay, that's the end of my formal presentation. Any comments or thoughts, anybody?
What about Jesus' siblings?
What about Jesus' siblings? We know from the book of Mark, he has 4 brothers and at least 2 sisters, because they name James, Jonas, Judas, and Simon as his brothers. And they say, we know his brothers, James, Jonas, Judas, Simon, and his sisters. So he's got at least 2 sisters. So Mary had at least 7 kids. She may have had more. We don't know how many she lost. She may have had more than two daughters. But his siblings are around, but they haven't become prominent parts of his band yet. Now, in the aftermath, as the church develops, his brother James will become the leader of the church in Jerusalem. By that time, Peter is over in Rome, and James is the leader of the church in Jerusalem, Jesus' brother. And he's known as James the Just. That's the term that's used for him. And we don't know about the others, but we only know about James.
There are stories about Christ as a child.
There are stories about Christ as a child, yeah.
And most of them have been deleted, or all of them have been deleted from the record.
From the canon.
Okay. Why were they deleted? Were the behaviors such that they were out of character with Christ's life?
Because they were out of character with Christ's life. These occur in the collection of books known as the pseudepigrapha, the false writings. I think it's in the Gospel of Peter or the Gospel of Thomas. One is a story that Jesus took some clay and was playing as a child and made some birds, and he said, "Fly and be free," and these clay birds came to life and flew away. Another story is that he was playing with some friends and some other kids were taunting him, and so he summoned a bear to come over and attack them and maul them for having made fun of him. These stories were not included. The pseudepigrapha is not secret. It's published. It's all everywhere available, but it's just not. As you read it, you can understand that this is not canonical writing. This is not the kind of stuff you would include in the Bible. This is extra, and these are fables as opposed to the facts of the Gospels.
Crucifixion was a common type of execution.
Crucifixion was a very common type of execution. If you've ever seen the HBO series Rome, in the early parts, there's a scene in which one of the officers, Caesar and Mark Antony, call in one of a centurion and tell him, "You go do this job," and he says, how are you going to take care of it? And he goes, "Well, I'll go out and grab a couple of the villagers and crucify them until they talk." And the next scene, he's got these two guys strapped to a cross. It was awful. After one of the major, I think it was after Spartacus's revolt, the slave revolt in Rome, the roads were lined for miles with crosses, with people being crucified. And typically they died within the day, but there were some cases where they suffered for as long as 3 days.
One way of keeping them under control.
Keeping them under control. It was intimidation.
Well, is this a recorded fact that some of them were covered with tar and were burned as torches to light the way?
We know that happened during Nero's persecutions in the amphitheater at Rome. That was one. It's recorded for us. I think Suetonius, in his Lives of the 12 Caesars, I'm pretty sure he talks about that. I know it's in biblical history, church history works that are not part of the Bible, but there is reports of that. They were sewn into skins, animal skins, and then hunting dogs were turned loose on them in the amphitheater. This is for sport. Nero had them strapped to posts, soaked in oil and tar and set ablaze to light the games. I mean, it was a gruesome, brutal age. And if you've ever seen the movie Gladiator and those fight scenes in the Colosseum, those are quite realistic. When generally they did not fight to the death, but then in certain times that there would be, they would have capital fights, to the end, and people coming to watch. Well, friends, thank you for joining me today. I wish you God's peace and blessing as you continue on with your day. And we hope to see you on Sunday, 10 o'clock for worship Holy Communion this week. So please join us, and may the peace of God be with you as you continue on in his grace. God bless. I'll see you next time.
Thank you.